you know what? My doctor told me deadlifts are bad for my back. I'm not even going to do them.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Now, low back pain, unfortunately, is an issue that is going to face, or does face, a lot of people in this world, okay? In fact, it's a very common reason for doctor's visits, or even for, it causes a lot of time off of work and low productivity at people's jobs because of that debilitating low back pain that might get in the way. Okay, the problem is that oftentimes when you go see a doctor or general doctor for your low back pain, you're gonna kind of get a band-aid, just kind of catch-all treatment procedure to follow that involves icing the area, taking anti-inflammatories, and rest, okay? Now, those three don't really tend to fix the problem, okay? And again, like I mentioned before, they really just act as a band-aid for the issue and kind of treat the symptoms, but don't actually go over the issue and possibly why the back pain is there in the first place. So in this video, I'm going to kind of go over what could be causing your back pain, and also why not all back pain is created equal. Now, two of the big movements that people tend to eliminate from their program when they're trying to avoid low back pain would be barbell deadlifts and then barbell squats, okay? Generally, this is because that they cause very high compressive forces on the spine, and what that is I'm going to go over in a second, okay? And they tend to place a great stress on their back, okay? Now, when you have a barbell on your spine, okay, one of the things that it's going to be doing is, like I said, obviously the barbell's on my back, so the weight of the bar and any of the added weights that I put on the bar is going to be driving right down into my spine, okay? That is one of the ways that it leads to very high compressive forces, okay? So, your spine is made out of vertebrae, okay, and then intervertebral discs, which are basically cushion disc or shock absorption discs that are made out of collagen that go right in between your vertebrae, okay? So, it's one vertebrae here, one vertebrae on the bottom, and then an intervertebral disc that's going to be in between those two, okay? When you have the barbell on your back, it's actually going to push right down, okay, and have the two bones push right together into the disc and cause that compressive forces, okay? The other way that it's going to be causing compressive forces, and this actually makes a little bit more sense when you visualize the deadlift, since the bar is not right on your back, is that the muscles that surround your spine are actually going to contract, okay, and also cause that compression of the spine, okay? So when your muscles contract around the spine, what they're trying to do is they're trying to create maximum stiffness of your spine, okay? Your spine is an incredibly strong structure when it's kind of all stacked in a line, okay? Now, if we had evolved and our spine was always stacked, meaning it was kind of like a metal rod, okay, and it didn't have the flexibility that we had, well, then a lot of human movement that we see wouldn't be possible, right? Like throwing a baseball, you need to be able to twist at your upper back, hitting a tennis ball, throwing a football, even kind of twisting, catching a football, all those things really wouldn't be super possible if we just had a rigid spine. So our spine evolved to be able to do both. It could be able to move and bend and as we needed to, and be as flexible as we need to. But under heavy load, we want it to be as stiff and as rigid as possible to stay as safe as possible and have the highest level of performance possible. So one of the ways that we do that is all the muscles that surround the spine contract incredibly hard and cause high compressive forces on the spine to keep it a rigid structure, okay? Now, as I mentioned before, these compressive forces can be high and can cause some people back pain and back issues, okay? So they might not necessarily be the best exercises for you to use at this current moment of time, okay? Now, there's obviously some situations where you need to be doing barbell squats, barbell deadlifts, you know, if you're a strength athlete, if you're a strongman competitor, if you're a CrossFitter, if you're a power lifter, obviously those are right in your competition. You're going to eventually need to practice the skill of these lifts to compete, okay? If you're going for general athletics or general health, there might be no reason for you to actually perform these lifts. Now, there's not to say that you shouldn't strengthen your back, but you don't need to necessarily do it through barbell squatting and barbell deadlifting, okay? One of the things to keep in mind is while these compressive forces are very beneficial, doing too much of them can actually lead to joint degradation and injury, okay? I'm going to go over that kind of now as to why that happens, okay? So, when you place high compressive forces on your spine, okay, you actually cause microfractures in your spine to happen, which are literally little bone fractures in the bones that make up your spine, your vertebrae, okay? And what that leads to is telling your body that it needs to adapt, grow, and recover, and actually it grows stronger bone in order to handle higher compressive forces in the future, okay? Now, your collagen in your intervertebral disc can also adapt, okay? Collagen is the substance that makes up a majority of our tendons and ligaments all throughout our body. So like, take our Achilles tendon right down in our calf there. That's mostly made out of collagen. Our ACL, LCL, MCL, PCL, all in those knees there, in your knees, mostly made out of collagen. Well, those structures can also adapt and grow and get stronger through the stimulus of training, okay? When you perform sprints, well, actually the tendons and ligaments in your lower half are actually going to be damaged, grow, and then recover, okay? That can also happen with the intervertebral disc in your back as long as the stimulus isn't or is handled correctly and intelligently, okay? In one of my Just for Thought videos, my most recent Just for Thought video, I kind of went over the general adaptation syndrome, okay? Which is a natural response and adaptation cycle that we go through in response to stress. So there's 3 parts to this. The first part is the alarm phase, which is the initial stressor, okay? In this case, it would be the actual workout or the actual act of back squatting or barbell deadlifting, okay? Which would cause those microfractures to happen, okay? There's the resistance phase, which goes right after that, okay? And that is your adaptation to that stressor. So through the process of recovery, your body grows and adapts and gets better, okay? And then the last phase in that cycle would be exhaustion, and that would be if the stressor proceeds for too long or at too high of an intensity, and it exceeds your body's ability to adapt and recover, okay? But if you don't have that initial alarm phase, which is that breakdown that happens naturally in the body through the process of working out, then you don't get that resistance phase, okay, and that adaptation process. So if you don't push enough, a little bit, again, intelligently, but if you don't push enough into that damage, then you're not actually going to get any response and grow, adapt, and recover, okay? So, we see how back squatting and barbell deadlifting can place those high compressive forces on the spine, okay? Well, that can happen with other movements too, like that can happen with trap bar deadlifting, that can happen to a lesser extent with goblet squatting, but can also happen with safety bar squatting to the exact same extent, okay? So anytime your spine needs to be rigid and a very stable structure, it could be placing high enough compressive forces to cause those microfractures and micro damage to collagen, okay? But again, through the process of recovery and adaptation and restoration, those structures get stronger, okay? Louis Simmons once said that weak things break, okay? I've never seen a situation where having a weaker structure in the body leads to less pain, okay? So, that strength comes at a price, okay? It doesn't necessarily come for free, okay? And it's going to take effort, and you might be sore the next couple days, you might be in a little bit of pain, you know, whatever that even means the next couple days, because you are adapting, okay? Adaptation does not come for free, but avoiding that adaptation or that stimulus that would cause that adaptation altogether just leads to a downward spiral and leads you to lose any strength in those structures that you might have. And a weaker structure just has a greater ability to break in the future when it is exposed to high forces that it might not be ready for, okay? So training is super important to make your back strong. You can't avoid stressing your back and expect to never have back problems. Okay, so I just went over why it's not great to avoid any sort of low back stress, okay? Now I want to kind of go over three different reasons why you might be having pain to begin with, okay? So, like I said, there's three reasons to my knowledge at this point in my career as to why you might be having pain in a certain structure, in a certain part of your body, or during a specific movement, okay? Now, the first one is going to be movement dysfunction, okay? What movement dysfunction is, pretty easily, is it's poor technique, okay? The reason why poor technique might be causing some sort of pain is that in a specific movement, you're not moving as efficiently as you could be or should be, so the stress of the movement might be acutely targeted in one area that might not be able to handle that stress. Again, maybe you're not moving as efficiently as you could be, and that could be causing pain. So a big compound movement might be kind of targeted in a certain area, or all that stress might be targeted in a certain area that maybe shouldn't be or might not be ready to handle it, okay? A good example of this would be a barbell deadlift. So when we go up to a barbell, we don't necessarily want to look like a cat taking a shit, okay? So we go down, if we start to pull and we lose that compressive tension and our back starts to round as we pick it up, well, again, I was just talking that our spine is incredibly strong when it's in one line, okay? Well, that was not one stacked line, okay? What that could be doing is, again, I talked about how your spine is a column of bones stacked on top of each other with intervertebral discs made of collagen in between. When the compressive forces on the spine push those discs straight down, the force is evenly distributed around the collagen disc, okay? So that one side is not taking more force than the other, okay? When you round like that under those high compressive forces, well, then that force gets skewed towards one side of the disc, okay? And might be placing an unnecessary stress on one side of the disc compared to the other, okay? So it could be causing, again, high stress in your disc that it's not necessarily ready for, okay? That could be causing pain, okay? You have to remember, pain is a signal to your body that something is going wrong or something isn't working as optimally as it could be, okay? So movement dysfunction oftentimes precedes structural damage, which is something that I'll get to. That's the third category of pain that I'll get to in a little bit, okay? But movement dysfunction is pretty much just saying that you're on the road to possibly having a real injury down the line, okay? Now, another reason why this poor movement function could be causing pain, okay? Well, you do have a lot of muscles that go all the way through your back. Like I was talking about, those are the muscles that cause those high compressive forces on the spine to keep it stable. But when it starts to round under that load, what is actually happening is you're placing a very high eccentric stress on all of those muscles. So an eccentric stress and eccentric load, when you're placing tension on those muscles as they're lengthening, okay, is one of the reasons why lots of muscle damage can occur, okay? We know that higher muscle damage happens during eccentric loading, okay? Well, that eccentric loading in a rounded back deadlift will look like this, okay? So that high amount of muscle damage can also be what is causing your muscle back pain and soreness, okay? Now, we can use that high eccentric loading in other areas of our body, like our arms, for example, okay, to build muscle, okay? And we want to have a lot of muscle built and have very big hypertrophied and big, strong muscles in our low back to provide as much structure as we can for the low back, okay? However, we don't want to do that at the expense of our joint integrity, okay? And when we start to do, rounded back deadlifts that we might not be ready for, or our squats, our back starts to round underneath our squats, that will place a very high eccentric stress on the muscles in the back, which will be great for their hypertrophy, but it's doing it at the expense of the joint integrity of your disc in between your spine. There's other movements that are better options to hypertrophy those muscles, okay? Not necessarily doing it with the heavy compound movements like barbell squat or barbell deadlift, okay? So, movement dysfunction can precede, or it can tell you that you're having pain. Movement dysfunction, movement dysfunction can cause pain, okay? The next category of pain, okay, can be instability, okay? Instability or stability is the ability to handle and control and resist unwanted forces in a specific movement, okay? All human movement is going to be a balance between mobility and stability within that specific movement, okay? So if you don't have the ability to handle forces within a certain position, your body is going to prevent you from getting into that certain position by two ways, okay? It's going to either give you pain when you're in that position, or it's going to cause extreme stiffness so you can't get into that position in the first place, okay? Both of these are protective mechanisms to prevent you from going into a range of motion that might cause your body injury at that time, okay? So, if you can't handle these forces because you're unstable, again, like I just mentioned, one of the ways your body could be communicating that to you is through the signal of pain, okay? Here's an example for myself. So, one of the things that I'm currently working on is that my left hip here is a lot stiffer and immobile and less stable than my right hip, okay? I think just through my whole sport career, that's kind of how my hips started to develop, okay? So I'm going to show you an example with a little bit of help here. Okay, see if I even need it. On my right, I'm pretty free and unrestricted in that hip airplane there, okay? But right when I get to there, I start to feel a little bit of groin restriction. So if I want to go a little bit more, it's feeling pretty tight. And I felt like I almost just fell over there. So it feels much tighter, okay, right here in my groin when I try to open up on this hip as opposed to this hip, okay? So, that's one of the things that I'm currently working on, is that ability to control that motion and control those forces in this hip so I can perform my lower body movements, okay? This instability and this stiffness has led to some more injuries and problems on this side than I've ever had on my right. So, a little bit more ankle problems and a little bit more hip problems because this hip is a lot less stable, okay? Now, why would I give you a hip example when we're talking about low back pain? Everything is connected in the body, okay? Your back is a very vulnerable spot, okay, that might have a bunch of forces that it is not necessarily ready to handle kind of focus themselves because of problems that might be going on in other places in the body. Okay, if you have immobile ankles or hips like we were just talking about, that stress might kind of go up the chain into your low back and be causing low back pain or issues, but it's not necessarily because the low back is the problem. It's because problems up or downstream in your legs or upstream, maybe even in your upper back, are actually causing the issues, okay? So instability or inability to handle force that inability to handle and control force in a certain position can be causing pain, okay? Then the last category is structural damage, okay? The problem is that everybody wants to run towards structural damage as the cause of the issues without kind of taking a look at the first two categories and trying to see if those can be fixed first, okay? So, structural damage is like a herniated disc, okay? That's actually way more common than you think, okay? Herniated discs can happen all the time, and you probably have one without even knowing it. So, one study, and I'll put the next two studies that I'm just about to talk about in the description below in the video. One study showed that if a third of people 20 to 30 years of age have a herniated disc, and that number goes up by about 10% every decade, okay? So that if you're 50 years old, there's about half the population of 50-year-olds walking around here that have a herniated disc and don't even know that, show any symptoms or know that they have a herniated disc, okay? Now, on the opposite end of that, okay, there was another study that I think it was followed 500 individuals, might have been more than that, I can't remember exactly, but they MRI'd them throughout the entire study, okay, and it found that 84% of those individuals who started to experience debilitating back pain showed no difference in any of their MRIs. Okay, so that means they had no structural damage, despite the fact that they were experiencing back pain. Okay, so structural damage doesn't tell the whole story. Okay, it might be one part of the story, but it's not the whole picture. You are not your picture. Okay, like a doctor would go and read your MRI. So you have to be working with somebody who understands those first two categories, okay, first, before you start running towards structural damage as the reason and the cause for your pain, okay? A herniated disc is not the gloom and doom that a lot of people make it out to be. In fact, a herniated disc, given enough time and given enough rest, can actually heal itself, okay? But you can't necessarily do anything to exacerbate it or make it worse during that time, okay? But your body has a natural immune response that can heal a herniated disc over time, okay? So, there's a lot of things that could be causing low back pain. You need to work with a qualified professional that doesn't just tell you to rest, ice, and take anti-inflammatories, because those actually blunt the immune responses and will make the structural damage worse over time, okay? So make sure you're working with somebody who knows what they're talking about. Take care of those first two categories first before you start saying that structural damage is the reason for your pain. One of the things that I've experienced throughout my career of training general population and high school and college athletes mostly has been that a lot of people, when they first start to conventional deadlift, will complain the next couple of days that their back hurts, okay? However, after they go through a normal upper body workout, or maybe a lower body workout where they're trap bar deadlifting and sled pushing and doing things that maybe don't place as high compressive forces on the spine, they'll just complain that their arms or legs are sore the next couple days. Okay, awesome. Again, we talked about at the beginning that adaptation does not necessarily come free, okay? That price that you need to pay is that effort and maybe that sort of discomfort, pain, and soreness that you might feel that next couple days, okay? That tells you that your body did something, okay? But everybody kind of comes in and they complain that their low back hurts after conventional deadlifting, okay? After, maybe that's week 1 of a 4-week program. By weeks 3 or 4, not only are they doing more weight on the deadlifts, but I'll ask them the next couple days afterwards and they're like, oh, no, my back is fine, okay? There's a fear around low back pain and soreness specifically because we think that our body should never be sore there, okay? Now, there are definitely times of the year, especially if you're in athletics, that you don't want to be sore there, okay? However, if you're in an off season, if you're a strength athlete, you have to understand that your low back is going to adapt just like other parts of your body are going to adapt through training, and you can't necessarily be super worried if you feel sort of low back soreness. Again, we talked about how there's stress placed on the muscles that cause some muscle damage during deadlifts, for example, okay? Well, that is the stress, that's the alarm signal that tells your body to adapt and grow and recover through the process of restoration and recovery, okay? If you don't have any of that damage, you're not going to grow and adapt and recover, okay? People are totally fine saying like, oh yeah, my arms are super sore and they're hurting the next couple days, but they're not okay saying that for their back, okay? Now, I understand that your back could cause a lot of problems, okay, if you do actually hurt it, and we don't necessarily want to push into so hard that we do injure ourselves, okay? So it's a very slow, gradual adaptation process that you take for the back, okay? So maybe you progress a lot slower for your back than you would progress for a sled push that mostly just works your legs, okay? However, avoidance of any of that, I feel, as we made it pretty clear in this video, avoidance of the problem doesn't fix the problem, okay? If you don't stress the back in any way, then you're going to have a very weak structure back there that's more prone to injury, okay? If you don't learn how to move properly, okay, or learn how to create stability in end ranges of motion or kind of under load or in extreme ranges of motion, your body is way more susceptible to structural damage, which might be causing that injury, okay? But we also notice that, again, that structural damage doesn't have to be causing pain, debilitating pain or injury, and is the stimulus that tells your body to grow and adapt and recover. It's a very delicate balance that one needs to walk the line, okay, between hurting yourself in a controlled manner and hurting yourself too much, okay? Make sure you're working with a trained professional if you're kind of confused on this, okay? Make sure that that professional is listening to you and your concerns. But then you as the individual need to realize that if you really want to get better, there's a price you're going to have to pay for it, and that price is probably going to be effort, pain, and soreness. Just make sure it's not too much.